In the heart of the Roman Empire, among the marble columns and grand arenas, there was one luxury so treasured that it eclipsed even gold-purple dye. Not just any purple, but a rich, royal shade that adorned the togas of emperors, senators, and the elite. The mere mention of purple in ancient Rome was a declaration of status, wealth, and power. But why did this color become so prized, and what secrets did it hide beneath its regal hue? Let's begin by traveling back to the bustling streets of ancient Rome, where a particular merchant would offer his goods for sale. The market was full of people, merchants shouting about the finest spices from the east, slaves offering their labor, and, of course, the aristocrats, their robes flowing with a distinctive shade of purple. The dye was not just a color to them. It was a symbol, a tool, and, in many cases, a weapon. It set the wearer apart and communicated a social message that transcended words. The origins of this purple, however, were far from simple. Known as Tyrian purple, this color was derived from a small sea creature, the murex snail, found in the Mediterranean. The process of extracting the dye was incredibly labor-intensive, requiring thousands of snails to produce just a small amount of the dye. Imagine the patience required to painstakingly harvest the glands of these tiny creatures, often by hand, and then carefully extracting the dye, a process that could take days, if not weeks, to perfect. Yet, despite the arduous work involved, Tyrian purple was coveted by all. But what made this dye so special? Well, it wasn't just the rarity of the process that made Tyrian purple so valuable. It was the color itself. The deep, rich hue of purple was unlike any other natural dye of the time. While other dyes were susceptible to fading or discoloration, purple from the murex snail held its color far better than any other. In the blazing sun of the Mediterranean, where other fabrics might bleach out into dull shades, the purple remained vibrant and stunning. It was, in essence, eternal, just as the Roman Empire wished its legacy to be. Roman writers and poets frequently remarked on the power of purple, especially when it came to the display of political authority. One such writer, Pliny the Elder, described the labor involved in obtaining the dye and marveled at its stunning visual effect. To him, purple was not merely a color, it was a divine gift, a badge of the gods. Roman emperors were known to wear purple robes to symbolize their divine right to rule, with some even being buried in them to ensure their eternal connection to the gods. But how did purple become associated with such grandeur? The connection between the color and the elite can be traced back to the Roman Republic, before the empire even took form. Originally, purple garments were worn by the nobility, senators, and generals, but as the Republic fell and the empire emerged, the use of purple became increasingly restricted. Emperor Augustus, for example, made a point of issuing decrees that only emperors and their closest advisors could wear garments dyed with Tyrian purple, further solidifying its connection to power and exclusivity. As the centuries passed, the exclusivity of purple continued to grow. By the time of Emperor Caligula, the color was practically synonymous with the emperor's personal authority. It wasn't just the emperors themselves who were associated with purple. Imperial courtiers, high-ranking military officers, and members of the Senate wore purple to show their closeness to power, and they did so in very specific ways. The imperial toga, known as the toga picta, was richly dyed in this unique purple shade, often adorned with gold embroidery. Even the smallest swatch of purple on a garment was enough to suggest that the wearer held significant influence. The high value of Tyrian purple also had economic implications. Whole industries were dedicated to the harvesting and production of this dye, with the
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Today, we celebrate not just a victory, but the dawn of a new era for Rome.
Tyre's association with purple was so strong that even its name became synonymous with the color. The city's immense wealth was largely built on the purple dye trade, and its merchants became some of the wealthiest in the Mediterranean world. But what about the common people? Surely, such a color was reserved only for the elite. It's true that, in Rome, common citizens were generally prohibited from wearing purple garments. But the law of this exclusive color was hard to resist. Some citizens would try to replicate the rich shade using inferior, cheaper dyes, but their efforts were usually frowned upon by the Roman authorities. Still, the idea of purple trickled down to the lower classes in small, subtle ways, with purple trimmings or accents appearing on clothing as a small symbol of aspiration, if not power. So why did purple come to dominate the visual culture of ancient Rome above all other colors? Could it have been something deeper, something more symbolic than just wealth and status? Was it the durability of the dye, or was it something about the psychology of color that made purple so irresistible? Could it have been the connection to royalty and divinity that made purple so appealing to those who longed to be associated with the gods themselves? As we explore the impact of purple in Rome, we begin to uncover more questions about its true significance. Why, for instance, did the emperors guard the color so jealously? What did they fear might happen if purple was no longer reserved for the elite? And what role did purple play in the broader political and cultural shifts within the empire? The journey of Tyrian purple did not end with mere garments, as we have seen. It transcended fashion, evolving into an emblem of power, divinity, and statecraft. The color's connection to the Roman emperor was particularly profound. As the empire expanded, so too did the symbol of the emperor's divine right to rule. Purple became not just a luxury but a political tool, wrapped in the weight of authority and divine favor. In the public eye, purple was a constant reminder that the emperor was not simply a ruler, but a figure chosen by the gods. The emperor was, after all, the bridge between the mortal world and the divine. What could be more fitting than the color of gods to represent the most powerful man in the empire? Purple, derived from the rarest of sources, was naturally seen as a divine blessing. Its luminous permanence suggested something otherworldly, something untouched by the hands of time. Emperors wore purple not just as an indicator of their status, but as a visual representation of their celestial right to command. In fact, the use of purple in Roman society was so intertwined with political and religious power that it was restricted by law. The sumptuary laws, which governed luxury and excess in Roman society, restricted the use of purple to the imperial family. A law passed by Augustus, for example, declared that only emperors could wear purple-dyed garments. This decree was enforced with great fervor, as any violation was seen not just as a breach of fashion, but as an affront to the gods and the natural order of imperial power. Purple's exclusivity helped maintain the emperor's supreme authority. For centuries, Roman emperors safeguarded this color and its association with divinity. Only those closest to the emperor were allowed to wear purple or purple-trimmed garments, and even then, the color was used sparingly. For instance, only high-ranking generals or imperial family members could wear a toga picta, a special garment dyed entirely in purple and reserved for ceremonial occasions. This limitation of the color's use helped to create an aura of exclusivity that reinforced the imperial power structure. The emperor, who wore purple from head to toe, was clearly set apart from the rest of society, his power symbolized by this rare and costly hue. The emperor's purple robe wasn't merely decorative, it was a political statement, an unspoken command to recognize his divinity. In this way, purple became an instrument of imperial propaganda, a visual tool that reinforced the emperor's position as the chosen ruler, with his authority extending over all aspects of Roman life. The symbolism of purple extended beyond the emperor to the political elite, including generals and senators. While they might not wear robes as lavish as the emperor's, they were still expected to demonstrate their connection to imperial power through their garments. Purple remained a key marker of high status, representing the wearer's closeness to the emperor. A general returning from a victorious campaign might wear a purple-bordered toga to celebrate his triumph, his status elevated in the eyes of the people. These public displays of purple were not just about status, they were carefully crafted performances designed to reinforce the power dynamics of the empire. But not everyone in the empire had the privilege of wearing purple. For most Romans, the color remained out of reach. The vast majority of citizens wore simple tunics of white, brown, or faded red, unable to afford the expense of the purple dye. Even in the market, purple remained a rare commodity. The average Roman citizen could only dream of owning garments dyed in such an expensive hue. Instead, they wore modest clothes, their lives punctuated by the grittier details of survival, growing food, working the land, and raising families. Purple, then, was not just a marker of social standing, it was also a reminder of the divide between the elite and the masses. It was a constant visual cue that reminded commoners of their place in the social hierarchy. However, even the most common Roman found ways to express their yearning for this elusive color. Though they could not afford the real thing, many Romans incorporated purple into their lives in small ways. Some would wear simple purple trimmings on their garments, hoping to convey a sense of connection to the elite. Others might adorn their homes with purple tapestries or cushions, hinting at their desire for a life beyond their means. In these small acts, we can see the powerful hold purple had over the Roman imagination. It wasn't just a color, it was a dream, a symbol of the life they wished to lead but could not attain. The exclusivity of purple combined with its association with divine power, helped to reinforce the social order of the Roman Empire. But this connection wasn't without its tensions. As we'll explore, the Roman obsession with purple led to more than just displays of power and authority. It also played a role in the empire's downfall. The control of purple dye, the restrictions on who could wear it, and the increasing desire for luxury all contributed to the growing divisions within Roman society. The elite, draped in their purple robes, stood in stark contrast to the growing frustrations of the lower classes, who could only dream of the privilege and power represented by the color. As we move forward, we'll explore how these tensions manifested in the later years of the empire. How did the symbolism of purple influence the political landscape as the Roman Empire began to crumble? Did the emperor's obsession with purple and its divine associations play a role in the empire's ultimate collapse? And what, if anything, did the average Roman think of the color they could never wear? As the Roman Empire expanded and began to stretch its borders thin, the mighty force that had once driven the empire's unity began to show signs of weakness. The luxury and exclusivity associated with purple dye, once a clear marker of divine imperial authority, slowly began to unravel. This unraveling was not just about the fading grandeur of purple, it was tied directly to the declining power of the empire itself. In the late stages of the empire, the once unassailable control over the color purple started to falter. As the wealth of the empire waned and corruption spread, the fabric of Roman society began to fray. Purple, once solely the domain of emperors and the most elite, became increasingly available, albeit in diluted forms. The growing middle class and even some military leaders found ways to obtain purple fabrics, either through trade with distant lands or by importing cheaper dyes. In fact, during the decline of the empire, less expensive alternatives to Tyrian purple began to appear on the market, often in the form of cheaper synthetic dyes made from plant-based sources. These false purples were much easier to obtain than the expensive murex-derived hue and lacked the sacred aura of true purple, yet they began to spread across the empire. This democratization of purple was a clear sign of the empire's shifting power. The exclusivity once tied to the emperor's divine authority was eroding. Purple became less a symbol of sacred kingship and more a commodity, available to anyone who could afford it. The emperor, once the sole wearer of purple, began to lose his ability to control the symbolism of the color. What had once been an unmistakable mark of supreme power now became part of the broader marketplace of ideas and material goods, no longer entirely under imperial control. In this shifting political landscape, the emperor's once sacred authority also began to crumble. The rise of military leaders who wore purple or adopted purple-laced garments was a notable sign of this change. For instance, military commanders who led successful campaigns would return to Rome not only with spoils but often draped in purple. This was a potent symbol of their newfound power, demonstrating that military victories had given them a certain legitimacy, at least in the eyes of the people. Purple had once symbolized the divine right of the emperor, but now it was used to express the growing power of military figures. As the empire became increasingly divided and militarized, the symbolism of purple started to shift. Purple's power as a tool of propaganda was no longer confined to the imperial throne. The very soldiers who once fought for the emperor were now capable of wearing the same purple cloaks that symbolized the emperor's divinity. This shift in the use of purple was a reflection of the changing power dynamics within the empire. With the breakdown of central authority, purple, once an exclusive tool of imperial propaganda, became a more common sight. This change marked a fundamental shift in the way power was perceived. The emperor's once godlike status was no longer so clear-cut. The purple robe, once associated with divine right, began to lose its significance as a marker of singular imperial authority. However, the decline of purple's exclusivity was not just a sign of the fall of imperial power, it also mirrored the cultural and societal fractures that were spreading throughout the empire. As Roman society splintered and social mobility became more pronounced, the lines between the elite and the common people began to blur. The growing middle class, which once aspired to be like the nobility, now had access to purple garments. They could wear the color of power, but it was no longer the same powerful symbol it once had been. The emperor's authority no longer seemed as divine as it had been in the past, and the plebeian class, once shut out from the most sacred symbols of Rome, now had a chance to wear purple too. This democratization of power did not happen in a vacuum. It coincided with the growing instability of the Roman Empire itself. In the West, the empire was fragmenting, and the military was becoming an increasingly dominant force in the political sphere. The emperor's ability to maintain control over the empire's vast borders and internal politics was waning. In the East, the Byzantine Empire was rising, and with it, a new form of imperial authority that took purple and its symbolism to new heights. The Byzantine emperors, building on Roman traditions, continued the practice of wearing purple as a symbol of their divine authority, but they did so in a way that was more restrained and ceremonial. By this point, purple had become a tool to reaffirm, rather than create, imperial power. Yet, even as purple's original meaning was diluted in the West, it continued to carry a certain weight in the East. The Byzantine emperors, who were deeply invested in the idea of divine rule, still employed purple as a marker of their sacred authority. The long-lasting legacy of purple in the Eastern Roman Empire reflected a lingering connection to the color's ancient roots. It was still reserved for those at the pinnacle of power, but its meaning had shifted. It was no longer an ever-present reminder of an emperor's divine right. It had become more of a ceremonial custom, a vestige of the past rather than a revolutionary tool of statecraft. The fate of purple, then, is a fascinating microcosm of the larger story of the Roman Empire itself. Just as the empire's authority splintered and fractured over time, so too did the symbolism of purple. What began as a symbol of divine, unchallenged power became, over time, a commodity, a tool for those seeking power outside the bounds of the emperor's throne. As purple became more common, it signified not just wealth and status, but also the political instability and fragmentation of an empire that once seemed eternal. In the end, the purple that had once been an emblem of the Roman Empire's divine authority became just another color in a sea of shifting allegiances and crumbling institutions. The lessons learned from the rise and fall of purple as a symbol of power resonate even today, offering a reflection on how symbols of authority can evolve and lose meaning in times of political decay. What role does the symbolism of power play in modern societies? Can a simple color, once reserved for kings and emperors, ever retain its original power once it becomes available to the masses? This transformation of purple, from a divine color of emperors to a common hue of ambition, speaks to the changing nature of power itself, how it shifts, how it is claimed, and how its symbols lose their grip as societies evolve. In this light, the story of purple is far more than a tale of color. It is a mirror to the rise and fall of empires, a quiet commentary on what happens when the divine becomes merely fashionable.